The alien princess feared her human husband, until he saved her kingdom. The guards were already moving when I reached the eastern corridor, and my first thought was not about survival. My first thought was that I had made a terrible mistake trusting no one. My name is Valith. I am the seventh daughter of Emperor Cathon of the Cathari, and 3 months ago, I was given in marriage to a human named Colin Drake, as part of a peace treaty neither side fully believed in. I had signed the documents myself, pressed my seal into the warm wax, and told my father I was not afraid. I had lied. I had read everything about humans before the wedding, every file the Imperial Archive held, every report from our diplomatic scouts, every biological study conducted on the species that somehow refused to go extinct, despite spending most of their history trying to destroy themselves. They were strange creatures, warm-blooded, two-armed, laughably fragile compared to a Cathari soldier, and yet the files kept using words like relentless, and adaptive, and dangerous, in ways that made my secondary hearts beat a little faster. Colin was standing at the end of that corridor now, between me and the 6 armored soldiers of House Vren, and he was not running. That was the thing I could not understand about him, even now, even after 3 months of watching him move through my world like he belonged in it. He was not running. He had no weapon I could see. He was wearing the same plain gray uniform he always wore, his dark hair slightly out of place, his hands loose at his sides. One of the soldiers told him to move. Colin looked at them the way a man looks at rain, not afraid of it, not dismissing it, just noting it, calculating something the rest of us could not see. I want to explain what had brought us to this corridor, because the story does not begin with the soldiers. It begins 6 days earlier, at a court dinner where I first understood that someone in my father's inner circle wanted him dead. Lord Cathus had been my father's advisor for 30 years. He was calm and gray-scaled, and always smelled faintly of ceremonial incense. And on the 44th day of my marriage, he leaned close to me at a formal dinner and said, very quietly, that the treaty I was part of would soon be irrelevant. He did not say it as a threat, he said it as a fact, the way you tell someone the weather is going to change. Matter of fact. Already decided. I said nothing. I kept eating. Inside, something cold settled in my chest. I did not tell Colin. I should have. I know that now. But we were still in the early weeks of learning each other, still navigating the strange and careful space between two people who had been matched by politics rather than choice, and I had not yet decided what kind of man he was. He was observant, I knew that. He noticed things other people missed. He had quietly changed the frequency of the light panels in our shared chambers 3 days after we moved in together, without saying a word, because he had seen me wince at the blue shift tone every morning. He had not asked me if I wanted it changed. He had simply changed it. I found that more unsettling than if he had made a point of it. He also laughed at the wrong moments. Not cruelly, just involuntarily, like his body had a different set of rules for what qualified as appropriate responses to disaster. When the Vreth ambassador's ceremonial robes caught fire at the diplomatic reception, every dignitary in the room went rigid. Colin laughed, then immediately helped put the fire out, then spent the rest of the evening visibly guilty about the laugh. I could not decide if this made him trustworthy or simply strange. Then came the 5th night after Cathus's quiet warning, when I heard sounds in the corridor outside our chambers at an hour when all movement in the palace should have stopped. I opened my door and saw 2 of my father's personal guard walking with Lord Cathus toward the east wing, where the Imperial communication arrays were located. They were carrying equipment I recognized from military briefings, signal jammers. I turned around and Colin was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, watching me. "How long have you been awake?" I asked. "A while," he said. "You heard them?" "I noticed they've been running different patrol patterns for the past 6 days," he said. "And I noticed 3 of your father's senior advisors have been meeting at odd hours in rooms without surveillance. And I noticed that the Vreth fleet repositioned 2 of their border cruisers 4 days ago, in a direction that doesn't make any military sense unless someone invited them." I stared at him. "You knew," I said. "I suspected," he said. "There's a difference." I didn't know enough to act yet. I needed one more piece. He stood up and reached for his jacket. "I think I just got it." "What are you going to do?" He looked at me for a moment, And I saw something in his face I had not expected. Not the calm I had come to associate with him. Something older and quieter, the way a fire looks when it has burned down to coals. It was not fear exactly. It was something that had already processed fear and moved past it. "I'm going to go have a conversation," he said. He was gone for 3 hours. When he came back, he sat across from me at the small table in our room and explained what he had been doing for the past 3 weeks, while I had been watching him like he was something dangerous. He had identified Lord Cathus as the central figure in the conspiracy within the first 10 days of our marriage, not because he had any intelligence reports or access to sealed court communications, but because Cathus looked at Colin the way people look at furniture they plan to move. Useful for now, easily disposed of later. Colin had started building a secondary network of information the same week, not through official channels. Through the kitchen staff, the maintenance workers, the lower-ranked guards who were paid too little to have any loyalty to the noble houses and too often overlooked to be careful about what they said around. He had spent weeks being quiet and pleasant and entirely non-threatening while listening to everything. He had pulled the financial records of House Vren, House Datha, and the Cathus advisory accounts 3 days ago through a back channel he would not specify, and found transfers that connected them to a Vreth banking intermediary. He had sent a secured transmission to the Cathari Imperial Fleet Command 2 days ago, flagging the suspicious Vreth fleet movements and attaching the financial documentation. He had moved my father. I stopped him there. "What do you mean you moved my father?" 6 hours ago, he said. I told him there was a diplomatic health concern and that the council was requesting a precautionary off-site consultation. I had documentation prepared. He was resistant, but he went. "You made up documentation to move my father out of the palace without telling me?" "I made up documentation to keep your father alive," Colin said, with the exact same tone of voice he used to discuss breakfast. "I was planning to tell you. I wanted to have the rest in place first." I did not know how to respond to this. In Cathari culture, acting without informing the senior member of a household was a significant breach of conduct. In human culture, apparently, it was Tuesday. "The rest," I said. "What is the rest?" He explained the account trigger. He had set it up 4 days earlier, a technical arrangement that would cause the financial holdings of all 3 noble houses to transfer automatically into the imperial treasury the moment any of the named account holders attempted to access their funds after midnight. He had timed it for tonight, knowing the coup attempt was coming, and knowing that the first thing a failed conspirator does is try to run with whatever money they can carry. "They can't flee," he said. "They can't pay anyone to protect them. The fleet they were counting on the Vreth to supply has just received documentation from me proving that the conspiracy was real, which means the Vreth High Command now knows their operatives were exposed. An invited invasion they could spin, an exposed conspiracy tied to their operatives they cannot. They'll pull back." I was very quiet for a moment. "You did all of this," I said, "while I was watching you eat breakfast every morning and thinking you were harmless." "I know," he said. He almost smiled. "You watched me like I was going to bite you for about 6 weeks." "You are a very strange creature," I said. "Probably," he agreed. That was when the alarm went silent mid-pulse, which was actually more alarming than an alarm because it meant someone had cut the system. Colin was on his feet before the echo finished, and I was half a step behind him, and we were 3 corridors from the communication hub when the soldiers of House Vren found us. 6 of them, armed with the close-range pulse weapons that the noble guards carried, built for corridor fighting, the kind of weapons that made armor irrelevant at short range. They were wearing full tactical gear and had the flat, professional expressions of men who had been paid very well to not have opinions about what they were doing. Colin was between me and them. The lead soldier told him to step aside. They were not there for the human, he said. This was an internal Cathari matter. Colin did not step aside. He said, in a voice so ordinary it was almost offensive given the circumstances, that he understood this was technically an internal matter, and he respected that, and he also wanted them to know that the signal he had set to transmit automatically, if he did not personally cancel it within the next 20 minutes, had just become very relevant. The lead soldier asked what signal. Colin explained, briefly and without drama, that he had prepared a secondary transmission 4 days ago as a contingency. It contained everything: names, dates, communications, financial transfers, the Vreth connection, the identities of every guard and staff member who had been turned. It was addressed to the Imperial Fleet Command, the Galactic Council, 3 independent news distribution networks, and the personal communication device of the Vreth High Commander, who would be extremely unhappy to see his operatives' names attached to a failed internal coup on the public record. "You have about 18 minutes," Colin said, "to decide whether you want to be the people who stop this or the people whose names are in that file." No one moved. I could hear my own heartbeat. I could hear the faint hum of the building's power systems. I could hear, very distantly, the sound of my own palace, in the uncertain state between one kind of future and another. The lead soldier looked at Colin for a long time. He was trying to find the bluff. I could see him looking for it, probing the edges of what he had been told, measuring the man in front of him against the claim he had just made. Colin looked back at him with that coal-fire expression, quiet, already decided, not aggressive, not frightened, just completely and utterly certain in a way that was somehow more intimidating than any weapon would have been. The soldier lowered his weapon. Then the one beside him did. Then all 6 of them did, one by one, like a slow wave, and the lead soldier said they would require assurance that their cooperation would be noted, and Colin said that he would personally guarantee it, and I believed him, and apparently so did they. We reached the communication hub. Colin canceled the automatic transmission with 11 minutes to spare, and the 6 soldiers of House Vren stood awkwardly in the corridor outside and did not try to stop us, because they had made a calculation, and the calculation had come out on our side. Lord Cathus was taken into custody 2 hours later. Houses Vren and Datha, with empty accounts and no military support, surrendered to the Imperial Guard before morning. My father returned from his diplomatic health consultation furious and deeply confused by the brochure Colin had given him, which described the off-site location as having excellent mineral bath facilities and panoramic views. The Vreth fleet turned around, not because they were defeated, because the math had changed and they were practical. I found Colin afterward where I had half expected to find him, sitting on the floor of a corridor in the lower palace with his back against the wall, eating a small packaged food item he called a ration bar, looking like a man who had been awake for 40 hours and was finally allowing himself to notice. I sat down next to him on the floor. It seemed like the right thing to do. We were quiet for a while. Outside, I could hear the distant sounds of the palace resettling into something like peace. Boots on stone, doors, the particular silence that follows the end of a crisis when everyone is too exhausted to make noise. "Were you afraid?" I asked. He thought about it seriously, which I had learned was something he always did when I asked him a real question. "Yes," he said, "the whole time." "You did not look afraid." "I know," he said. "Humans practice that, not hiding it exactly, more like running alongside it. Fear and action at the same time. It is not comfortable." He looked at the ration bar. "We have a very long history of doing things that were not comfortable." I thought about the files I had read. 4 mass extinction events survived. Civilizations built in the rubble of previous civilizations. A species that had nearly destroyed itself multiple times and kept going anyway. Not because it was not afraid, but because it had developed, over thousands of years, the specific and somewhat irrational habit of continuing forward regardless. "I was afraid of you," I said, "when we were first married." "I know," he said, gently. "I catalogued everything you did. I watched you like you were dangerous. I noticed. And you said nothing. You needed time," he said. "I was a stranger from a species you had every reason to be cautious about. Pushing you to trust me faster than you were ready to would not have actually gotten me your trust. It would have gotten me a performance of trust, which is not the same thing, and is worth considerably less." I turned that over in my mind. It was a very human thing to say, precise and patient, and slightly too aware of how people work. "You changed the light in our chambers," I said, "on the 3rd day. You winced every morning. You did not ask me about it. If I had asked, you would have said it was fine," he said. You were still in the stage of being diplomatically polite. He was right. I absolutely would have said it was fine. The ring, I said. You had it made in the right size before the wedding, without being asked. I got your measurements from the records your staff filed with the treaty office, he said. It seemed like a small thing to do. It was not a small thing, I said. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I understood something that I should perhaps have understood sooner. Colin Drake had not been assigned to this marriage as a trophy, or a symbol, or a placeholder. He had come into it the way he came into everything, which was quietly and completely, and with the specific, patient intention of doing it right. He had not been waiting for me to stop being afraid of him. He had been making space for me to stop being afraid of him, which was an entirely different thing, and considerably more difficult. I do not fear you anymore, I said. Good, he said. He sounded tired, but genuine. I understand something now that I did not understand before, I said. About your species. What is that? I thought about how to put it into words that would be accurate. Every other species in the Galactic Council is brave when it is not afraid, I said. The Cathari are brave when the odds favor us. The Vreth are brave when they have superior numbers. Even the most honored warriors among my people are brave in conditions that make bravery logical. Colin waited. But humans, I said, are afraid all the time. You know exactly what danger looks like because you have spent 100,000 years cataloging it. You have files on your own extinctions. You name your catastrophes and study them, and build plans for the next one. You are not a species that does not know fear. No, he agreed. We very much know fear. You simply refuse to let it be the last word, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I never thought of it that way, but yes, I think that is probably accurate. I looked at my husband, sitting on the floor of my family's palace at the end of the longest night either of us had probably ever had, eating a dry packaged food item with the calm expression of a man who had recently talked 6 armed soldiers out of a corridor, using nothing but information and certainty, and I thought, I was told I was being given to a monster. I was right. I just did not understand what the monster was built to protect. My father reinstated the Treaty of Consolidated Reach with a formal ceremony that was considerably less tense than my wedding. He shook Colin's hand for a very long time and said something to him in a low voice that I was not close enough to hear. Colin smiled, that brief crooked smile I had catalogued in the very early days as potentially suspicious, and now recognized as genuine, and nodded. Cathis and the leaders of houses Vren and Datha faced the imperial court. The proceedings were long and formal, and exactly as serious as they deserved to be. The Vreth sent a communique 3 days later, formally expressing regret over the border fleet movements and proposing a new round of trade negotiations. Colin read it and said, mildly, that he was glad they were practical. I asked him once, weeks later, if he had ever truly believed the plan would work. He thought about it for a moment, and then he said that he had believed he had done everything he could with the information he had, and that after that, it was largely a question of whether the soldiers at the end of the corridor were the kind of men who would rather be right or rather be alive. Most people, he said, given a real choice, choose alive. And if they had chosen differently? I asked. He was quiet for a moment. Then I would have found another way, he said. There is always another way. That is the thing about humans. We do not stop looking for it. I believe him. I have read every file the Imperial Archive holds on his species, and I have watched my husband move through my world for months now, and I have come to understand something that no file ever managed to say clearly. Humans are not fearless. They are not stronger than us, or faster, or built for survival in ways that other species are not. They bleed easily, and tire quickly, and feel every bit of fear that any creature feels when it stands at the edge of something that could destroy it. They just have a very long and very stubborn history of standing there anyway. And sometimes, in the quiet of a corridor at the end of a long night, that is the only thing that matters.